I love numbers, but I hate budgeting. I know how important it is, but the traditional methods of budgeting don't work for me, and I know for many of you, they don't work either. Here's a secret though. Budgeting does not have to be complicated, nor does it have to take much time to actually implement effectively. In this video, I'll walk you through the simple system my wife and I actually use, and I'll show you how anyone can implement this. The best part is once you have the system in place, it doesn't take any more than 10 to 15 minutes each month to actually track and ensure you're staying with it. So to start, let's actually talk about why people fail at budgeting. Because in order to implement the right solution, it's really important that we understand the reason that most budgeting systems actually fail. And once we walk through why most budgeting systems fail, I'm going to show you step by step what my wife and I do every single month to ensure that our budget is number one, easy to maintain, but number two, effective and keeps us on track for what we want to do. So here's why budgeting fails. Do you remember back in high school or college when you'd be assigned an essay to write and it was due at the end of the semester? Well, when did you actually get that essay done? If you're like most of us, that essay was completed the night before it was actually due, or maybe even the early morning of when it was actually due. Now, what if that essay had been assigned and due in 1 week? What would you have done? Well, you still would have gotten it done the night before, but it would have been 6 days from now as opposed to the entire semester. Now, what if that same essay that was assigned at the end of the semester or due at the end of the semester was actually due tomorrow? Well, you'd get it done right away. This is called Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law is a law that says that work expands to the time allotted to it. If you have a leaky faucet that you know you need to repair within 2 weeks before family comes to visit, you're probably going to wait 2 weeks to get it done. Versus, same principle, if you know family's coming tomorrow, you're going to get that leaky faucet fixed today. So if Parkinson's law says that work expands to time allotted to it, it can be translated to finance to say money available is money spent. Whatever time is available is time spent, whatever money available is money spent. So here's an example to show you what I mean. Let's assume that your income each month is $10,000, just to use a nice simple example. So $10,000 after taxes, after any 401k contributions, you have $10,000 per month coming in. Now, your brain tricks you. Your brain says, James, you have $10,000 to spend. And you may even be thinking as you're watching, well, yeah, James, you just said you have $10,000 to spend. Well, not really. And here's why. Let's assume that I have a mortgage payment and it's $2,500 a month. And let's assume I have a car payment that's $500 a month. And let's assume I have some subscriptions and gym memberships and whatever it might be, and those all total to $1,000 per month. Well, if that $10,000 per month coming in, if my mind tells me I can spend it, my mind is lying to me because so much of that has already been spent. It's already been accounted for because of these monthly recurring expenses that I have. So when you start to understand that, it starts to make a lot of sense. If your mind is telling you there's $10,000 per month to spend, but reality is after you back out all those expenses that are already accounted for, there's oftentimes a fraction of that $10,000 actually left over for you to spend. So in many cases, that's the core of the problem. Our mind is telling us there's more to spend than there actually is. So there's two things that we need to do in order to solve this. Number one, we need to create clarity. And number two, we need to create constraints. Let me show you what I mean. When I say create clarity, what I'm really meaning is we need to understand where our money's actually going. We need to understand that whatever's coming in, how much of that is actually already accounted for. So we actually created a spreadsheet, and if you want it, you can actually download it from the comments below. And this is exactly what it will look like when you click on that link. If you click on that link below, we'll send this to you and you'll see that you'll get a link that says this, make a copy. If you click on make a copy, it will take you to this spreadsheet. And I have a little video that walks you through how to use it. I've already filled in some of these numbers. The actual spreadsheet you get will be blank, but you can start to follow along even as we go through this video so that you can start to implement the system if you feel it works for you too. So let's go through this spreadsheet together. And if you want to follow along and start filling out your own spreadsheet by downloading that link, go ahead and do so. But these numbers are already filled in just in preparation for this video. But what you can see is this is broken down into a few different sections. We have fixed monthly expenses here. We have non-fixed monthly expenses. And then we have discretionary expenses. So I made these numbers up just acting as if this was my wife and I's budget. So you can follow along. But what you can see here is fixed monthly expenses is any of these expenses that have already been spent. Now, technically, the money hasn't been drawn from our account, but we've already committed to spending them. So in this case, let's assume mortgage or rent is $2,600. Then there's gas and electric that's about $100 a month. And there's water and landscaping and trash and car insurance and all these different expenses that you might have. Now, as you go through all these things, you'll notice in this example, the total of that is $4,650 a month. Now, if my income is $10,000 a month, what that means is that almost half of it has already been spent before I've even made a decision to spend it. These are all things that are just on auto pay. They're going to come out, they're the regular amount every single month, and that's already committed. So what I know is that I have $10,000 minus this $4,650 left to spend on other things. So what's actually left after that? Well, I have $5,350. That still seems like a lot of money. Well, that doesn't mean that we've covered everything yet. These fixed monthly expenses are just the things that are already accounted for. The next category is a pretty big category too. These are things like groceries. These are things like gas. So things that I do need every single month, but I haven't already committed to exactly how much I'm going to spend on groceries, or I haven't already committed to how much I'm going to spend on gas. So they are monthly regular expenses, but they're not fixed. And I'll show you why that matters in just a little bit. Non-fixed monthly expenses, I'm plugging in some numbers here. Obviously, you might have your own numbers, but what this comes out to here in this example is $1,050 per month. So when I've gone through fixed monthly expenses and I've gone through non-fixed monthly expenses, I've covered most of the essentials that I need to live on. What comes next is discretionary expenses. So these are the things that you don't have to spend, but if you want to be able to do something fun, if you want to have a date night with your spouse, if you want to go see a movie, if you want to go out to eat, these are those expenses. And here's how we do it. We have kind of like a joint expenses. We just have an entertainment fund. I'm calling it dining out and entertainment here. This is things if my wife and I are going to go on a date night, if we're going to go see a movie, if we're going to go spend time, the two of us, this is the money that we've set aside to do that. In addition to that, my wife and I also have our own fun money. If Ashton wants to go purchase something, she doesn't need to ask me for permission. If I want to go purchase something, I don't need to ask her for permission. This is money that each of us can do whatever we want with it. Whereas all these other decisions, we're making these together. How much are we going to spend on housing? How much do we want to spend on food? How much do we want to spend on these other categories? That's very much a joint decision. But what I do with my allowance, or Ashton does with her allowance, is only our decision. And what that creates is a sense that we don't feel like we have to get each other's approval for every little expense that we buy, especially if it's just a personal expense. All right, so that looks good so far, right? Well, you would think so. But how many of you created the perfect budget? You created the spreadsheet, you tracked everything, all the numbers lined up, and then there was that one-off expense. Your friend from college got married and you wanted to buy a wedding gift. Or it's Christmas and you had to go buy presents. Or the car needed new tires or whatever it was. There was this one-off expense. And the thing about those one-off expenses is they're really never that one-off. They seem to always be happening. So if we go back here, you notice that the categories skipped from 1 to 3. And what's in the middle that I have hidden here is those non-monthly expenses. And this is what we need to come back to. You see here, I've put some examples. We have gifts. So it seems like every single month, someone's having a birthday or a baby shower, just someone that you want to get a gift for, and that can break the budget if it's not accounted for. Or you have property taxes. If your property taxes aren't impounded as part of your mortgage payment, it might seem like your monthly expenses are lower until those 2 months a year that you have a significant property tax bill due. Now that can break the budget if you haven't prepared for it. Same with life insurance if it's not paid monthly, or vacations, or auto registration, or car repair and savings. You can create whatever categories align best to your life, but what this is, these are things that are easier to think about on an annual basis. Vacations, for example. You might have 10 months a year where you spend nothing on vacations, and then 2 months where you spend quite a bit. So how do we think about that? Well, what you want to do is you want to think about the entire year. How much might we spend on vacations this year? And what this spreadsheet does is instead of plugging in a monthly number, like we would for these categories, because we know the exact monthly amount, plug in an annual number. So you can see here I plugged in $12,000 for the year. What this is going to do is divide that by 12 and say, here's the monthly amount. Now, what this doesn't mean is it doesn't mean that you're actually going to spend $1,000 a month on travel. You're going to save that amount, and then every few months or every several months, you're going to actually spend it. So what we do is for every single one of these accounts, these non-monthly expenses, we have a separate high yield savings account. Every single month we put money in for gifts. Every single month we put money in for vacations. Every single month we might put money in for car savings. So when it comes time to take that vacation and we need to spend $5,000, $10,000, whatever the amount is, yes, we have to spend that, but it's not breaking this month's budget. We're simply pulling money from what's already been saved and using that for vacation. A big one for those of you that have children is you say, hey, James, this works great if you don't have kids, but what about those kids' expenses? I don't know when gymnastic bills are going to come, or there's summer camp, or there's some major expense that they have. I don't either. But what you could do is you could change one of these just to children's expense. And what you do is you could say, okay, on an annual basis, maybe this isn't perfect, but maybe I need to have $6,000 for summer camps and music lessons and sports and whatever else it might be getting into. Well, if you plug in that annual amount, it's going to say, here's how much you need to be saving on an annual basis to make this work. Now, here's the bottom line on all of this. Plugging numbers in alone doesn't do you any good. You need to make sure these numbers you're plugging in align with the income you have coming in. So if I plug these numbers in, that's $10,500 per month. I told you before, I only have $10,000 per month coming in this hypothetical income that I'm talking about. Something's got to give. So what this is doing, this clarity, is it's saying, okay, where do I have room to give? What am I willing to sacrifice here? Well, I just made up this kids one here, so I'm just going to take that out real quick. But if we go back to this, now I'm at 10,000. Well, this is really powerful because maybe I run a retirement projection. That retirement projection says, James, you got to really be saving more money than you already are. Well, if I'm only saving $330 a month, and by the way, this is after 401k, because the $10,000 per month coming in that I have, that's after my 401k contributions have already been deferred. So if I run my financial projections and realize even in addition to my 401k, I need to be saving closer to, say, $830 a month. If I plug that in, what it tells me is I need to find $500 to trim somewhere else. And so this is where it can be very powerful to say, what are those trade-offs that I'm willing to make? But this is that first step of creating clarity of where is money actually going, and then we can start the process of creating constraints. So step number 2 is creating constraints. And step number 2 is the essential part of all of this. Because my guess is all of you have probably created a budget before, but what does that look like? Well, it looks like you write on a piece of paper how much you want to spend, or you have an Excel spreadsheet that says how much you want to spend, or maybe you do this through an app, but how much you want to spend and how much you actually spend are rarely the same thing. How many of us have said, yeah, this is what I want to spend, and the end of the month comes and we said, oh my gosh, I didn't even come close. Spent way more on all these things than I wanted to, and we just give up. Out of sheer frustration, we say, how on earth do we reconcile what I want to be spending with what I'm actually spending? Well, there's a few ways to do it. I'm going to speak to the way that's worked for me. Here's the problem I see most people falling into with their budgeting. Most people are doing their spending on credit cards. Now, nothing inherently wrong with that, but when you're spending on a credit card, the hard thing is you're not seeing how much you're actually spending every single day or how much that's adding up to every single month unless you're meticulously tracking your expenses. To make matters worse, what you're spending this month, you don't even pay for until next month. And this month, you're trying to pay for things that you spent on last month, and you don't even remember where that money went. And you're left wondering, how on earth my credit card bill gets so high? And unless you go through every single expense, you're just not going to find a way to reconcile the two. So what did my wife and I do? Well, we stopped using credit cards. Sure, there's points, sure, there's some benefits to it, but what we found was it became too difficult to track how we were spending. Now, we could, like I said, if I wanted to every single day reconcile expenses and see if I want to spend $500 a month on my own personal expenses, how much have I actually spent? But we started using debit cards instead. And not only do we use debit cards, but we have separate debit cards for different types of transactions. I'll show you what I mean. We started using a tool called EveryDollar. Now, I'm not endorsing this. I have not getting paid at all by EveryDollar, but EveryDollar is an app that we use. Now, there's a paid version and a free version. We just use the free version because every single month we can come in here and plug in, number 1, what income is coming in. Like I said, I'm just making up some of these numbers now to walk you through it. But let's assume I say $10,000 per month is coming in. The next step is to say, what expenses do you have? And this is now going to show you the concept of a zero-based budget. Well, expenses, we just looked at those here. So here's the expenses I marked down in the spreadsheet, and I've just taken those and put them right here. So all of these are the same numbers. And what I like about EveryDollar is I can look at this and can say, what are my recurring expenses? What are my expenses for gas and groceries? What about entertainment? And it creates this little summary right over here. What do I do with this? Well, what I do with this is I've created separate bank accounts at our bank titled recurring expenses, gas and groceries, entertainment, which again is kind of those joint expenses if we're doing anything as a family, and then Ashlyn's money and James's money. So if I was going in to do the budget this month, I would literally slide this amount of money. Now I have a separate account that's called income. So all actual income coming in doesn't go to any of these and cluttered up. There's a separate account that's kind of just like a pass-through account where money goes to our income account, and then I immediately slide it over to fund recurring expenses or gas and groceries or entertainment or Ashlyn money or James money. Here's the beauty of this. I'm not saying the system's for everyone, or that's the only system that works. It's just the system that works for us. I don't have to track my expenses. Number one, recurring expenses, that money's already accounted for. If $10,000 comes in and I slide $7,200 over, what that means is that's already spent on mortgage or rent or the gym bill or utility bills or the savings we're doing for retirement or for car purchase or whatever it might be. I don't have to think about it. This account here is going to go from $7,200, and by the end of the month, it's going to be down to zero. And the next month, I'm going to refill it again. These accounts here are the only things I really need to look at. Ashton's money, I don't really need to look at. That's for her. She can spend on whatever she wants to spend on. My money, if I'm spending on myself, I'm not tracking things. All I'm doing, if I want to know how am I doing this month, I open up my app and say, okay, I have $400 left. I have $300 left. I have $0 left. Maybe it's the 15th of the month. I'm not going to spend any other money on myself until next month, because if I do, there's nothing left. I'm going to hit an overdraft. I'm not going to be able to pull money out. So in doing this, what it's allowed for is we don't have to track expenses, because all we need to do is look at the balance of each account. Hey, gas and groceries, how are we doing? Are we on track? Well, we need to be mindful because that's already starting to come down too much. We need to spend a little bit less this coming week. Again, this isn't the only way to do it, but it's a way that's really worked for us to where I'm a big fan of discipline. I think discipline's a great thing. I don't want to actually have to exert my emotional energy or discipline on tracking expenses on a credit card every single day to ensure that we stay within budget. So this is kind of like the anti-discipline approach to budgeting. Not looking at anything. Once a month, I'm coming in here and refilling these accounts, and then we're spending them down through the rest of the month. The next month, we do the same thing. And here's actually what I like about EveryDollar. Again, we're just using the free version. You can use the paid version where it's actually tracking your expenses for you. We don't need it for that. This is more for me to understand how much do I need to put into each of these buckets each month to use. But if I want to say, look at the next month, I don't have to go in and re-input every single transaction. I can just click start planning. It's going to pull all the data from the previous month into there. So if I say, you know what, this month we want to increase our retirement savings, and I bump that up by $200 a month. Great. It's going to now show you're over budget. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Let's say here, I've determined we need to increase our savings for long-term investments. That needs to be $530 a month. Well, I'm going to get this notice that we're $200 over budget. So I need to go through this and find $200 somewhere, or I need to increase income by $200 in order to make this work. Maybe in this case, I say, okay, Ashton, we got to bump our own allowances down by $100 each. Well, it's an EveryDollar budget again. It's a zero-based budget. Again, it works. So this is the system that we use to ensure that once we've created clarity, which is the process we went through right here, what are our actual expenses? Now we're using this to create those constraints of putting the money in the right bank account and knowing that we're not going to be able to spend any more than that. This is simply the cash-based envelope system, but using it with debit cards instead, using it electronically with banks instead. Now here's a few closing tips. If you're watching this and saying, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, I will tell you it takes some time to get set up. Here's the first thing that we found. So we were previously banking with Chase. Now, any of these actual companies that I'm mentioning is absolutely not an endorsement or recommendation, just telling you what we previously used. Chase is fine, but anytime with most major banks, if you have money in an account and that money drops below a certain level, you're going to get fees. You're going to get charged a fee if your account balance drops below $2,000 in many cases. Well, with this system, we had many different accounts. In many of these accounts, we were trying to spend the money down to zero. So recurring expenses, for example, we're loading that up and it's being spent down over the course of the month. I don't want a $12 fee across 5-6 accounts every single month as we start to spend that down. So the traditional banks didn't work for us. Most credit unions, all credit unions really that I've seen, aren't charging fees if you don't maintain a minimum balance in an account. So we switched over to a credit union to be able to implement this. So I say that because some people say, hey, this system works great, I'm going to start to implement it. Well, you might need to switch banks depending upon where you are. The second thing, a lot of people say, hey, this system works great, but I really love my credit card. I'm just going to do the same thing with my credit card. Here's why that's really challenging to work. Let's say that I want to save my money up. I'm getting $500 a month and I want to buy new golf clubs. I don't even like golf, but let's say I'm trying to buy new golf clubs and it's going to cost $1,000 to do that. Well, if I have $500 a month, I'm going to need to save for a little bit to get there. So if I don't spend money this month and I don't spend money the next month, now I'm at $1,000. If I'm putting money into a separate bank account with a debit card attached, that money grows. If instead, I'm not giving myself a physical bank account, I'm just giving myself a $500 credit limit, well, every month that credit limit is reset. So it works fine if I was just to spend that $500 and then stop and spend it and pay it off. But how do I know how much money I've accrued if I'm not spending $500 every month? Well, if you don't have that money earmarked in a separate account, it's really difficult to do so. Not to mention the problem I mentioned before of the thing about credit cards that was difficult to do, and I don't have anything against them. In some ways I do, because people tend to overspend too much with credit cards. But in principle, they can provide some benefits. I just didn't find that in our situation, the benefit was worth the hassle, or the benefit was worth some of the cost of just making it too easy to overspend in certain categories. The hardest thing for tracking was this month, like I said, we look at our credit card bill. Why is it that balance? Well, I don't know. We have to go through every single expense last month. And it wasn't even just the calendar month. Typically the billing cycles may be the 12th of last month to the 12th of this month. Where do we spend money on? I don't know. Unless I'm going to track that, it's really difficult to tell. Debit cards give you a real-time assessment, because they are attached to a specific bank account, a real-time assessment of where money's going and how much money you have left before you're running out of money for that specific month. The last thing that I'm going to say about this is it's so incredibly easy to use, where once you do the upfront work, we did take some time to set up new accounts to determine what our expenses are. Don't expect yourself to know exactly what you're actually spending in certain categories. Give it a few months. Start moving in the right direction. It took us a few months to really dial this in. But now that it's dialed in, I spend 10 minutes a month. New income comes in, adjust the numbers a little bit in EveryDollar, and then fill up the buckets, fill up the different accounts with the specific amounts needed. No hassle, no tracking, and it allows us to stay on track with the things that we know are most important to us in terms of how we're spending. Now, knowing how much you're spending doesn't just help today. It also helps you for the future. Because when you get control of your budget, you can also start to understand how much can you save for the future? How much do you need to save for retirement? Now, if you want to understand how much do you need to have saved for retirement to spend $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 per month at that time, I created this video that you'll see a link to here. In that video, I'll walk you through how much do you need to save in order to be able to create a portfolio that can support a desired level of income throughout your retirement. Once again, I'm James Knoll, founder of Root Financial, and if you're interested in seeing how we help our clients at Root Financial get the most out of life with their money, be sure to visit us at www.rootfinancialpartners.com.